Russia says Ukraine targeted Moscow with more drone attacks today. The Russian Defense Ministry says 3 drones were intercepted. A business and shopping center, though, they say were hit. This is just the latest in a series of attacks by Ukraine. Take a look.
Wow, that is some remarkable footage. This happening inside Russia, in Russia's capital. Let's bring in CNN Chief International Security Correspondent Nick Payton-Walsh live from Zaporizhia for us. Nick, let's talk more about these drone strikes launched by Ukraine in Russia. I mean, clearly this is going to impact, it is impacting the people there. It must be very unsettling for the Russians. What do we know about it, and what do we expect the impact to be in terms of the morale and support for the war?
Yeah, I mean, increasingly now, Moscow's most prized districts, Moscow City, are kind of a bit of a financial hub where the wealthy would live in glass high-rise buildings. The most prized areas of Moscow increasingly under assault. This is during the second year of a war that many in Russia's government said might just last a matter of days. And these particular attacks, Russia's defense officials are suggesting were the result of 2 of the drones being jammed and falling down into the buildings you see there, and another one indeed being intercepted. And so this is a sign, I think, of Ukraine, who haven't openly declared responsibility for this, suggesting that they now have the capability to reach deep, far inside Russia, and that perhaps too they are trying to show ordinary Russians that this war is coming home. It's important to point out that ordinary Russians probably know a lot of this because of the sheer volume of Russians who have died so far. But Ukraine's Air Force saying that indeed this is a sign that the quiet, tranquil backwaters of Russia are indeed not so tranquil anymore. Part of the sort of oblique statements we hear from them, where they're not exactly claiming responsibility but making it fairly clear who's behind it. On the top of that too, the toll on ordinary Ukrainian civilians, as it has been nearly every night since this war began, continues to mount. In Sumy, near the Russian border in the north, 20 people injured, 2 dead in a series of Russian strikes on what was said to be an educational establishment, a high-rise dormitories as well. So civilian targets inside Ukraine, as so frequently hit by Russia, unclear if it is deliberate or just poor targeting. Indeed, here in Zaporizhia city in the last 24 hours, 2 people have lost their lives in a rare strike that's appeared to hit civilian areas here as well. So all of this showing a mounting of tension in civilian areas and targeting there. And too, we've seen a key railway supply bridge for Russia up from Crimea towards Zaporizhia, where I am, being hit, a sign of intensifying parts of Ukraine's counter-offensive here, trying to pressure Russian forces.
CNN's Alex Marquardt has more on Russia's military moves in Ukraine and its diplomatic push across Africa.
President Vladimir Putin of Russia has wrapped up several days of meetings in St. Petersburg with African leaders in which he faced pressure for Russia's war in Ukraine, as well as Russia pulling out of the grain deal last week, which greatly benefited the African continent by bringing down food prices and ensuring food supplies. Now, over the course of 3 days, President Putin walked a careful line of trying to be agreeable and reinforcing the relationship between Africa and Russia, but at the same time defending his war in Ukraine, which he continues to call a special military operation. Following a meeting with the African leadership over a peace deal that they had proposed in Ukraine, President Putin spoke with reporters and trotted out old arguments about the war in Ukraine. He insisted that a ceasefire is not possible while Russian troops are being attacked by Ukraine. He said that he has never rejected a peace plan, and he went on to say that he has been fighting, his troops have been fighting against neo-Nazis in Ukraine, which he has been saying the entire course of this war. He also commented on the ongoing counteroffensive, arguing that Ukraine has lost a large number of men and equipment. Here's a little bit more of what he had to say.
There are no major changes, and I think it is connected with the fact the enemy pulled back its assault units so they could recover their combat capability. They have suffered heavy losses.
Ukraine says it is now consolidating gains on the southern front from the past several days. It has pushed south. This is a major priority in the counteroffensive as Ukraine tries to split Russian troops in southern Russian-occupied Ukraine. Now, Ukraine says it has taken the town of Staromayorsk. It is the first town that it has taken during this counteroffensive in several weeks. It has been occupied for a very long time. Ukrainian forces are also pushing forward in the southern Zaporizhia region. Now, Ukraine has, since this counteroffensive began, has been prodding all along that southern front, trying to find a weak spot that it can break through. So far, it has not been able to do that. Their hope is that once they are able to pierce that southern front line, that they can pour through and this counteroffensive can accelerate. Alex Marquardt, CNN, Kyiv.
Well, Poland's Prime Minister says dozens of Wagner mercenaries in Belarus are moving towards a strategic corridor on the Polish border called the Suwalki Gap. Now, this connects Belarus to the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad. Poland's Prime Minister says the troop movement is part of an ongoing strategy to destabilize Poland.
We've got information that over 100 of the Wagner Group mercenaries moved towards Grodno in Belarus, near the Suwalki Gap. Why would they do it? Obviously, to prepare another stage of the hybrid attack on the Polish territory. They may, in Belarusian border guards' disguise, help illegal immigrants to enter Poland and destabilize it. But they may also try to infiltrate Poland themselves in immigrants' disguise. This would create an extra risk.
Well, thousands of Wagner troops are reportedly in Belarus after that failed military uprising in Russia. It was part of a deal negotiated by the Belarusian president, who has since asked Wagner to train his country's military.
How significant is it that these Wagner forces are moving closer to Poland's border?
I think it's very significant, Paula. And you know what's interesting about this is near the area that's called the Suwalki Gap. And the Suwalki Gap is this area between Lithuania, Poland, and Belarus that is really a vulnerable point for the NATO forces, because it allows the Russians, it's an area where the Russians have transit rights, or at least in the past had transit rights, to take equipment and men into the Kaliningrad Oblast, which is an enclave of Russia that Russia has had since basically the end of World War II. And that area is one that the Russians want to protect, because that's where their Baltic Sea Fleet is. They want to also be able to project power into the Baltic. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to make sure, the Russians are in the Wagner Group, is trying to make sure that they can maintain that connection to the Kaliningrad Oblast. If they can do that, then that of course puts forces at risk for NATO. And they also, in addition to keeping maritime forces at risk, of course, they're trying to keep Polish forces at risk, and at least tie down Polish forces in the northeastern part of their country, whereas in the southeastern part, that's the part that faces Ukraine, and that's the area that of course could also see some action if the Russians move forward in that direction as well.
It seems like a significant development. Should NATO be concerned about potentially being drawn in here?
Yes, absolutely, because what the Russians are trying to do is they're trying to set tripwires up so that if they do the kinds of things where they provoke a particular incident or do something like that, at least from a propaganda standpoint, they can say, look, we were attacked by NATO, or NATO forces are responding to us in a very provocative way. And it may not come to a shooting war, and hopefully it doesn't, but the risk is certainly there, and the risk has just gone up because the Wagner Group is still acting as a proxy for the Russians at this point.